Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored that we have the opportunity to exchange ideas. So what we agreed is that, I'm giving a brief input, like 15, 20 minutes, and then we will have time for discussion, because I think this difficult and challenging times, having the chance to exchange ideas and to even in a virtual space is a privilege. So I would like to use that privilege as much as possible. So I have this very brief presentation, Gendering Illiberalism. And this is the first handbook on illiberalism, which was published by the Routledge. And there are several other handbooks are coming out, not only because this is handbook time, which honestly I personally don't understand, no matter that I did one handbook on gender and war and contributed to 5 others, but also because it shows that illiberalism became this buzzword. And the publishers believe that this is something which really requires some more scrutiny. So what I would like to do in this talk is talk about this relationship of gender and illiberalism, very much based on this chapter, what I have in this handbook. And I will talk about the lessons, what we can learn from this, what are the problems in how I see the historiography. And also I will bring in 2 new theoretical concepts, which I have been working on in the past years with colleagues. First, gender as a symbolic glue, not gender as very often the liberal forces are using. And I'm also bringing in this concept of this polypore state, which is a contribution to the blooming, or sorry to say mushrooming, terminological discussion about what is actually happening now. So the reason why I started to work on this is simply I wanted to understand this beast which is around us. And therefore I started to work on the dark. I'm coming from the history of the dark legacies of the European history. And then I connected with the complexities of the concept of gender, how it became the site of this new Cold War, which is happening now. But this Cold War is not happening between 2 easily identified blocks of states, but the Cold War is happening in the countries themselves, or in the different regions, dividing those regions. And it's very much connected to the structural failures of the European neoliberal project and the formation of what I will call an illiberal political offer. So just to start with the basics, the definitions of illiberalism and gender. Of course, the concept of illiberalism is coming from, and most of you who are on this call, you know that from the discussing what's happening in Latin America from the 1970s and 80s, and that also connected to the different theoretical uncertainties, not only what illiberalism is and how do you differentiate it from other concepts. And in the Q&A, I would be very happy to discuss this and listen to your insights, but also the uncertainties as far as the concept of gender is concerned. So here we are talking about 2 concepts, the relationship of 2 concepts, which are in themselves are very difficult and problematic. So here I actually put up 3 points of these connections, where are these, where the illiberalism and gender can be connected. And the first is this sin-centered ideology, which was first used by Albertazzi and MacDonald in 2008, which requires a host ideology. So in itself, it doesn't really mean much, but it should, join or stick to another ideology. And this is also true for gender. And because I'm not sure you are familiar with the discussion of is there such a thing as fascist feminism? So in both concepts, the relationship to other ideologies is crucial. The other connection between gender and illiberalism is that they are both connected somehow to the failures of the European neoliberal project and what Campbell calls the neoliberal neopatriarchy, an ugly term for an ugly system, and criticizing this lean-in type of neoliberal feminism. For those who are not familiar, Sandberg, who was a CEO of Apple, or I don't know which corporation, who was saying that you individually, if you lean in, you can solve the problems. And most of the women who are, and most of the unprivileged, precarious groups, these kind of neoliberal feminisms are actually have a very serious impact as precarious employment and the connecting the women's employment to emancipatory aims basically failed because of the salary what the precarious employment offers is basically not a living wage. The care work and the care crisis disproportionately impacts women, and this kind of lean-in feminism is fetishizing choice and individualism at the expense of aiming for structural changes. And of course, this neoliberal neopatriarchy is somehow producing this is a product of this uncritical transition studies, and very often political scientists are still talking about transition, which is very problematic and very much, according to my understanding, leads to the emergence of the illiberal offer. And this illiberal offer is ended in a populist, welfarist, chauvinist response to the care crisis, which is a kind of offer, illiberal offer, in the absence of any kind of other offer. And it recognizes as symbolic, it recognizes symbolically and financially the care work. So the illiberalism and gender are very much connected because they are both results of the failure of the neoliberal project, and also the leaving certain groups behind, being strong for the strong and weak for the weak. And the third connection is the dark legacy. And the dark legacy of the European modernities, which is based on exclusion and marginalizing certain groups, and also those practices which are stemming from this kind of exclusion, like the colonialism, Holocaust, forced settlement, and the others. And the term gender in itself has got a very complicated trajectory as a traveling concept. And it has got, when somebody says gender, you might want to take one step back and think about what the hell the person is thinking of, because it has got four interconnected but very different meanings. First, about the biological meaning, that the either man or a woman. Then the second is, which is a descriptive category of using this kind of binaries in the policy analysis. How many women are in the parliament, for example, that is also called gender analysis. And the third is, which is looking at the social inequalities and the differences and the values, the constraints attributed to being born or female. And the fourth one is related to identity and identity politics. So these four different meanings are very important to differentiate, especially in public debates. So the present scholarship is, on the one hand, looking at the radical extreme right-wing politics from the supply and demand analysis, or they are simply calling the far-right parties or the liberal politics as testosterone parties. and or focusing only on the female leaders of the far-right politics. And the populist parties of neoliberal orientation, they have got this, they are offering a kind of modernist, emancipatory, egalitarian, anti-modernist and conservative politics. And I'm very happy to discuss this with you as far as care crisis, as far as reproduction is concerned. And recently we see that the center of the Illiberal International, which is the Hungarian Matthias Corvinus College, which recently bought an Austrian private university in Austria, is also focusing on teaching a form of gender studies and promoting women in leadership position. Also, there is a discussion about the backwardness, that, who are those, that, the veiling, and this whole discussion about if the wearing the veil is a form of empowerment or a form of oppression. And also the concept of moral panic, especially after what happened in 2016, is very often used as an explanatory category connecting gender and illiberalism. And the discussion is very often going to the direction of backlash, backsliding. And my position is that we'd rather have to look at the illiberal offer, because there was nothing good from where we are sliding back or lashing back, exactly because of the failures of the neoliberal project. So here I would like to go for these two concepts I'm suggesting to use. And the first one is the gender as symbolic glue, how gender, this concept, which has got this very problematic and complex intellectual trajectory, became the site for rejecting the neoliberal order and as a site for constructing the illiberal offer. And there are three key elements of this this term. One, it is a rejection of the present socio-economic order, which you can call neoliberal economic order. So it's basically an alternative, and it's a rhetorical tool in the construction of the new conception of common sense for a wider audience and to create a consensus, what is normal and legitimate. So it's very wisely and strategically used in political communication and also in academic communication. And what is the main reason why gender became symbolic glue? Because it glues together the different political actors and different political ideologies around a certain definition and understanding of gender, which is, of course, just in brackets, has nothing to do with these four definitions. And they unite these different political actors around this proxy concept of gender. So the relationship between illiberalism and gender is extremely complicated, and it is even more complicated because this concept of gender has got four meanings, plus gender is not what gender is, but it's what gender does, and it glues together in the illiberal discourse different political actors. And so it is a proxy for rejecting the current societal order. It redefines citizenship. Some citizens are more welcomed and more included than others. And this is a rhetorical tool for these neoconservative actors to create and to build this common sense about what is normal and legitimate. So this is an important tool in the socialization of fight in this new Cold War. And this whole discussion is an attack on the language of politics. Because it has been become unsuitable to describe the reality of more and more people and more women and more precarious human citizens, and more broadly against the disenchantment of politics in a Weberian sense. So this kind of discussion has got a very different political language. It is full of passion and it's very accessible. It's very exclusionarist. It very clearly defines who is the enemy and who is not. And that is a kind of site where the re-enchantment of politics is happening. So when you are discussing about women in politics, gender, budgeting, whatever, people fall asleep. Unlike when there is this discussion using this populist illiberal language, then the whole room has got a very different dynamic, because everybody feels to be in a position to contribute, because the language is not using the professional disenchanted language. If it's good or not, we can discuss it later. And because the illiberal politics is continuously renegotiating the meanings of gender for the sake of its own agenda. And this kind of renegotiation is happening in the framework of illiberal pragmatism. So anything goes. So in a sense, it's difficult to engage in a political fight, because when you think you understood the argument of the person whom you are in a dialogue, it turns out that very easily moves the position to another totally different, sometimes contradictory position. And it's it taps into the feelings of uncertainty, and then the moral panic comes in. And this is a part of an illiberal offer, which is able to build broad alliances. So if you just think about gender as a symbolic glue, glues together the Russian Orthodox Church, the Polish Catholic Church, the US Christian fundamentalists. So those who are actually have got really nothing to do with each other, but through this understanding of gender as a proxy, they are able to work together. And there are several NGOs and several gongos which are actually instrumentalizing this and putting into practice this collaboration, like the World Conference of Families, in order to establish a new world order. And of course, here is this Gramscian vocabulary comes in, redefining what is legitimate and acceptable, and defining everything else than themselves as a culture of death. And you already see, if you haven't got the fortune or the unfortunate position to read this text, that this is a very different vocabulary, right? And at the same time, there are also attacks on academic freedom, not only attacking gender studies, but attacking any kind of critical social science, humanities, and very often also STEM, because they are trying to bring in creationist understandings. So, main argument, illiberalism is not a backlash. That's, I wanted to make sure that you have this. And then the second concept, which is this polypore state, you see that with Weronika Grzebalska, we wrote this open-ed, bringing forward the same argument, what we put forward in a peer-reviewed article, what you will get in the last slide. So you can make some screenshots if you want to read the real peer-reviewed article. And the real peer-reviewed article was downloaded by 283 readers, and this article was read by more than 300,000 and translated to French, Spanish, and Estonian. So this kind of polypore, what we are arguing in this definition, and of course there is this hunt between political scientists who can come up with a more quoted description of this beast, but we are our starting point is not that the illiberal state is so effective. What we are actually arguing is that what is new in the polypore state, it's modus operandi, but it doesn't have any original ideas, and basically misusing the already existing concepts, institutions, and ideas. And I'm sure you started to Google what the heck is this polypore she's talking about. This is this mushroom which lives on the trunk of the tree and sucks the energy and the resources from the tree and produces nothing else than the polypore. And we are arguing in this article that this kind of state, the illiberal state, is a polypore state, because it builds up parallel institutions like NGOs or universities. Just think about the other example I've mentioned, that the illiberal Hungarian government just bought a private university in Austria just to copy, to mirror CEU in Austria. Different NGOs which look like NGOs, but they are actually gongos, and they are supported by the illiberal state. Then the concept of familialism, that they are always talking about families and not about women, which has got serious consequences as far as the rights of women for intellectual work or even to the right to vote are concerned. So we are going back to the debates of the 19th century if women should be admitted to universities. And then the securitization, because everything which is related to public policy debates now becomes an issue of security. So the different institutions of the illiberal polypore state are not engaging into policy discussions, but simply labeling the opponent as a agent or a threat or mentally sick or whatever, and they are presenting their solutions for that particular problem, which is usually ends up using lots of public funding in a very shady way not to solve the problem. So think about the COVID crisis, when the health systems collapsed, and then the military came in, and the military had to act as a state instead of the collapsed state. And again, the connection between illiberalism and gender. So the polypore state, as a response to the dominant global neoliberal demographic model, introduces familialist policies. So emptying the concept of gender equality, the practices of gender equality, and creates a new brand of women's rights, which are for the those women who are worthy and who are producing children and who are, of course, white. And Christian. So they operate through the appropriation and hijacking the previously existing mechanisms like gender equality mechanisms or family policies. So that's why I was not using the concept family policy in the first bullet point, but familialism, because this is not family policy, but they are using the family policy, appropriating the family policy for their own purposes, and of course, constantly shrinking the discursive spaces and financial opportunities to open to democratic resistance. And the argument what we are putting forward is not, it is not a revival of authoritarianism. This is not a backlash, but we are arguing that this is a new form of state, a paradigm change in the relationship between the state and the individual, which is, and here is the other connection, very much gender. And we understand this issue when we look at we are able to go beyond this routine comparative analysis of political systems along the East-West divide, following the Cold War logic of past dependency. And we are tracing the political developments in the countries in a global process. And here are the further readings which I was suggesting. So if you want to make a screenshot, the second is the article which I'm discussing together with Veronika Grzebalska, this illiberal polypore state. The second article is about the illiberal academic authorization. This is the article which was published in the Berichte für Wissenschaftsgeschichte, and turned to be the most read article in that very important professional journal, partly because the head of the Hungarian Accreditation Committee wanted me to withdraw this peer-reviewed article, and then I resigned from this accreditation committee, and then there was this international scandal. As a result, this article is the most read article in the Berichte für Wissenschaftsgeschichte. So you can say that there is a paradoxical recognition of academic work in this illiberal context. And the last article is about the how gender in academia has been disputed and what kind of strategies the different gender studies colleagues working in the gender studies are using. So thank you very much. That was my input, and I thought, that might be useful for our discussion. Thanks a lot.